Hello and welcome to this video blog on Cultivating Creative Mentalities, a Framework for Education by Claxton, 2006. And in this article, Claxton describes what kind of habits are needed to create a more creative mentality, and then looks at how much the education system supports creative learning. And this article was one of the set readings for last year, but this year it's on the wider reading list. But I thought there were some really useful ideas that might help you in your journals. So Claxton begins by asking the question, can we systematically become more creative? So can we follow some principles or strategies to ensure that our learning is more creative? Now, Claxton answers this question by dividing it into three smaller questions. Firstly, what are creative people like? Secondly, what goes to make up a creative mind? And thirdly, can those attributes be cultivated? And through this process, Claxton identifies 6 different habits or dispositions that make up creative learning, or make you more likely to behave in a creative way. So, going through these 6 habits in turn. Firstly, curiosity, having an appetite for questioning, and interested in the world, and interested in problems that you might come across. Secondly, resilience, having a tolerance for effort and frustration, persevering when things don't go to plan, and coping with the frustration that might be experienced. Thirdly, experimenting, messing around with things, taking a playful approach, trying what works. Fourthly, attentiveness. Claxton describes an intense, effortless concentration or focus that you get when you're engaged in creative learning. This feeling has also been described as the flow state by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. And it's that feeling where you're so absorbed in an activity, you get lost in it and you lose track of time. If you're interested in finding out more about flow, there's some references at the very end of this blog. Moving on. Fifthly, thoughtfulness. And this isn't just sitting there being thoughtful, but more how you can orchestrate between different mental modes that you have. How you can move between different types of mental activity. So you might move between a very detailed, focused kind of mental activity, and then to a much more ambient one where perhaps you're kind of daydreaming, maybe you're driving the car, or maybe you're doing a repetitive activity like washing up, and an idea just suddenly comes to you. So it's like a different mental mode that's also useful for creativity, as well as focused, detailed thinking, which is also useful. So then the 6th element builds on this, because this is about environment setting and regulating or creating your social world in such a way that it strengthens your chances to be creative. So for example, you might know that you work well in a quiet space and be creative on your own, or you might work better in small groups and prefer a more busy environment. And you might prefer different types of work at different times of the day. So we need to regulate our social world to ensure that it supports our creative habits. So those are the 6 creative habits identified by Claxton. And if you look down, you may have already noticed that the 6 habits spell create if you read them down. C-R-E-A-T-E. Cool. So, moving on. I've now got a task which is not something that you have to do, but it's just an example of the sort of thing you could do using the article here on the wider reading list to reflect upon your own creativity. And this is something that might then go into your journal. So, how would you assess your own creative habits using the Create framework? So you could go through the different elements like curiosity, resilience, and think about yourself. As well as thinking about how curious and resilient and all the other things you are, also think about when you're at your most resilient or curious or whatever, and reflect on why this might be. So these reflections could be recorded in your journal. A different task that you could do, again, none of these are essential, they're just examples of sorts of things you could do. You could go through the article and pick out areas where Claxton comments upon ways in which schools could be more supportive of the create dispositions. So Claxton looks at the education system and thinks, well, he critiques it, he gives a critical analysis of the strengths and weaknesses. And again, this is something you could record in your journal. Now, in the last part of the article, Claxton talks about how we can build creative cultures in our schools and talks about how we can ensure that these 6 habits are being promoted. And just to run through these very briefly, Claxton describes culture as the way we do things around here. And this could be the materials, the resources that are available, the sorts of activities that are on offer, how much time is given and how much flexibility there is in that time, what's the space like and what's the visual environment like, what kind of language is used, how much and when assessment is done, the jokes, memories and stories that might add to the culture, and modelling, that is, the way that the teachers or other adults behave. So another task you could do, an alternative one, might be to think about a culture that you've worked in and reflect upon the extent to which the culture supports creativity. How could the culture have been improved and what might have been the barriers to this improvement? And you can use Claxton's list of facets, the 9 things mentioned on the previous slide, just to stimulate your thoughts. And again, this could be something that goes in your journal. So what I've tried to do is give you some examples of how you can respond to articles and things on the reading list and build them into your journal by reflecting upon your creative process and your creative habits, and also a culture that you've worked in and the degree to which it was a creative culture. So finally, moving to the conclusions that Claxton makes, there are 3. Firstly, that changing culture of a school or an educational environment means having an impact upon pupils' habits, their dispositions, the things they usually do, and their sources of pleasure. Secondly, that changing our working culture to support creativity is not only about the change in practice, for example, the different activities, the routines, the expectations, but also acts as or functions as a carrier of change in our own values, so it reaches deeper down into our characters and who we are by changing our culture. And thirdly, a change in culture should ideally actively involve everyone in the community. So this means not just telling students what they should do, but building them into the process, giving them a voice in their change of culture. So I hope this has been a useful video blog. I haven't put in any quotation page references deliberately because I want you to read the article and see the words written in context and then do your referencing. Okay, so the full reference for the article is that, and I've also mentioned flow, and there's a reference there to one of the books on flow, and there's also a video blog on flow as well, just there. So I hope that's been useful, and bye bye for now.